So firstly I'm going to be talking about the workshops that we did in preparation of the castle. So we did a workshop on every single sense, and the first one I'm going to be starting off with is my sound workshop. So within my sound workshop I explored a range of sounds I could use within my performance. I knew I wanted it to be focused more on me speaking rather than the actual sound, so I just wanted it to be like basic. My original idea was that I wanted a vintage record player to be present within my set, and I just wanted some like old-fashioned music to be playing in the background with some sound effects. I took a piece of music and some sound effects and put them together using iMovie. The workshop was for my group to sit in a circle in the dark. We had 2 speakers to play our sound through. We also got the choice whether to use props to make sound. I used one device at the time so I was unable to use 2 speakers because I only had one device. And I feel like I wasn't as effective as like my peers because they were able to use 2 speakers, etc, etc. I feel like it would be quite difficult in immersive theatre to have only sound present. However, this could be done for like 4D audio or even just speakers. It all depends on the audio and if it's effective enough to make the audience feel like they're in your world. The workshop I did was a site workshop. So regarding my site workshop, I chose a range of props that I feel like would have worked with my performance and relate to my character. The items I chose were a record player, a red velvet chair, a large table and a side table. I already had it in mind how I wanted to set up my space, and I wanted it to look like a mysterious homely like front room. The successes of this workshop were that everything fit my theme very well, as I already knew what I wanted my set to look like. However, the only issue was the stress of not knowing if everything would fit in my space at the venue. Luckily for me though, everything did. In immersive theatre, it would be impossible for a performance to stand alone with only the aspect of sight, as it takes away the other senses needed. It may be possible with sound in just a set. So the next section of this video is going to be like the pre-performance questions. And the first thing I'm going to talk about the venue and if it fitted with like the theme. So I feel like the selected venue was perfect for the performance. It is local and has a haunted history behind it, which adds a spooky atmosphere already. The castle is also very spacious and there's plenty of room for props and for us to dress the space. The venue has 3 floors, so we were able to offer 3 floors of different performances. This gives the audience the chance to explore the historic landmark. The lift was also available for us to use to get the audience from floor to floor. We did a circus theme and dressed every floor appropriately to the theme. All of the lights were able to turn off to make the performance scarier. Regarding my space, my performance was based on a possessed fortune teller, and I wanted it to look like a homely yet mysterious front room. My original idea was to have drapes of material and like a long curtain behind me, however this didn't work in my space. So I improvised with my performance being separated from the rest with a large white sheet with a slit so the audience were able to walk through it. The idea was that I wanted to end the performance with me shooting myself in the head, but I didn't want this to happen in front of the audience, as I feel like it wouldn't look as realistic as I would have wanted it to. So I used a spotlight in front of this large white sheet so the audience can only see my shadow. I then used a large table and dressed it with a dirty and stained tablecloth. Up on the table I had tarot cards and a bowl of sweets that I handed out to the audience. I also had tarot cards scattered around my table, but made sure to keep these away from the audience because of the risk of slipping over. Also up on the table I had a candle, just to add a bit more light. I also had a little side table behind me where I had my record player and a little lantern to add a spooky feel about my space. There was a little doorway in my space that I wanted to fill somehow, so I created like a little Star of David sign with tea lights as another aspect of lighting. I used 3 rows of benches for my audience so they were quite close to me and were able to see clearly, and a separate chair at my table for the audience member I chose to take part in my performance. Other than that, I just used cobwebs and spiders to fill in any gaps to create a scary atmosphere for the audience. The next question was about my space. Regarding my performance space, there was definitely some voids I had to deal with. One of them was there was not enough benches for everyone because some groups were larger than others, so the audience were getting confused on where to go. To combat this, I told them to fill up the benches and stand around behind them, like behind the people on the benches, so that they were able to see the performance clearly. Some audience members were also stubborn, so I had no choice but to move them myself. Another problem I faced was people were taking a long time to walk over to my performance space, and it was eating into my performance time, and it just ruined the whole time slot that I had, and it even ate into the next performance. To deal with this, I had to leave my performance space and scream at people, telling them to hurry up. This scared people, so they quickly made their way into my space. Another void I was afraid was going to happen was, but it actually didn't for me, was that the audience member I picked was going to refuse to be picked. So they were going to refuse to stand up and be part of my performance. So I had to come up with a backup idea to prevent this from ruining my performance. The next question was about the lighting. I had many uses of lighting within my space. The main lighting I used was a spotlight, in which I chose red lighting, as it's like a demonic colour and it worked very well in my space. Another form of lighting I used was a whitewash spotlight behind my white sheet to give the audience the illusion I was shooting myself in the head behind the sheet. However, this didn't work as well as I wanted to because the audience were like kind of sat on an angle, so they couldn't really see the sheet clearly. And when I left the performance space, like, they didn't move to see where I'd gone. So they had to just get the illusion that I shot myself in the head from the gunshot that I used. I had like a little gap in my space that would have been quite bare if I didn't dress it up or props in it. So I decided to put like a little red spotlight into the gap, just so the audience could see the props, and it added a bit more lighting anyway. Finally, I created like a Star of David ritual out of tea lights just to put in like a little gap in the wall, but the audience couldn't really see it, like, unless they paid attention to the detail. However, I did add like a gloomy glow to the set. So the first question I got asked about the post-performance was how I used the 5 senses in my performance. So firstly, I'm going to talk about sound. So regarding the use of sound within my performance, I used the song Dancing the Devil Away. This worked perfectly within my performance as my character, the fortune teller, is possessed by the devil. I listened to the lyrics closely and I chose the song carefully, because I was looking at the songs from the 1920s era, as that's the time frame I chose to base my performance around. I wanted the audience to get the impression that it was being played from an old record player that was part of my set. The song worked perfectly with my performance. It was extremely creepy but fit the theme so well. I didn't want the song to play all the way through though, as I thought it would start to get a bit boring after a while. So instead of using a completely different sound, I decided to just slow the song down and edit it in for the scene where I tell the audience I'm possessed, or they get the idea that I'm possessed. I also used a record player static to make it sound like it was changing by itself or coming from the record player. At the end of my performance, I used a gunshot sound to give the audience the impression that I just shot myself in the head. Overall, my performance was mostly immersive in me speaking, so the sound weren't really like a priority to me. However, it was still effective despite the sound. But despite the sound sounding really good overall, I still faced like a few problems. So I was originally going to use 2 speakers, but one of them kept dying, or one of them was like lower than the other. So I was going to use like one Bluetooth one and one big one. But during the mock performance, my speakers stopped working completely, so I ended up with no sound at all. So I had to scrap that idea. I then had to edit my sound into one file and only use one big speaker. This was quite difficult as my speaker was behind like a sheet, in my performance, and I had to keep my song at a certain volume, and the gunshot had to be at the maximum volume just for the scare factor, and that they'd get a shock from it. I had to change my performance and get the timing perfect to make sure I had enough time to get behind the sheet and turn the volume up so that the gunshot would sound effective. I want to say this was successful, but it didn't really work most of the time. So by the time I'd got around behind the sheet, like, the gunshot had already started playing, or I didn't get there in time. So halfway through the performance, I had to like edit a massive gap in between my sound and my song just to get this on point. And it kind of like took the scare factor out of my performance, unfortunately, but if I could change anything about my sound, it would definitely be to make sure I have 2 working speakers or 2 large speakers, and maybe find someone there to control the sound for me. I did have someone there to control the sound, however I was told to just put the audio all in one file just to make it a bit easier for her. Regarding the sound, I feel like my performance could have still been successful without it. However, it made it so much more effective having the audio playing in the background. I also feel like I couldn't have portrayed my death without the gunshot. So the next sense I'm going to talk about is sight. So my character was a fortune teller, so I wanted my set to be as mysterious and interesting as possible. So I added little Easter eggs, but only people could see if they paid attention to the set, such as a severed head in one of the gaps and a skeleton hanging from the ceiling. I paid attention to every little detail in my set, making it look as lifelike as I really possibly could, to make the audience feel like they're truly in a fortune teller's front room. So for the next sense, I'm going to talk about the smell, like the smell I used. So for my smell, I used incense sticks and a strong perfume. I feel like incense sticks relate to a fortune teller so much, and the smell is potent and it lingers for hours, so I only had to light one, like, before every performance or before every few performances. And I made sure I only light one, like, every so often, because the smell was really overwhelming and it could potentially give people a headache. The smell of strong perfume relates to the smell of an evil entity. I researched what smells I could use, and these two seem to fit my character very well. The smell of incense also gives the audience a sense of security, as if I was trying to cancel out the devil with this scent of incense. Smell is important in immersive theatre, as it makes the audience feel a connection to the smell, and it makes them think about why the smell may have been used in the performance. Now I'm going to be talking about taste. So for the sense of taste, I chose to use hard-boiled sweets and give them each audience member. This did change quite a lot because I was going to use Turkish Delight, but you can't really find them nowadays. And I gave a sweet to each audience member. I then taught them to eat it as soon as I gave them it. I then revealed at the end that ended my performance that the sweets were actually poisonous and that they aren't going to get out of here alive. I thought hard-boiled sweets would work as they were all individually wrapped, so they were all hygienic enough to use for the performance if people didn't take one, even though everyone did take one because I had to force them to. Otherwise I would have ruined like the effect of my performance. So the final sense is obviously touch. So for touch I did 2 things. The first one was I ran my prop gun across an audience member's neck, but the one I chose to come and sit at my table, whilst whispering in the ear. I wanted to do this to make them feel uncomfortable and that they felt like trapped because I wasn't going to let them move. I then poured a small amount of water over their head, just enough to give them a shock. Not swill them, just a tiny little bit of water. I feel like these fitted well within my performance, as the audience members weren't expecting it and it may have scared them. About how I used the 4th wall within my performance. So the 4th wall was used all the way through my performance as I spoke to the audience and interacted with them. I made sure to interact with every single person in one way or another, whether it was whispering in the ears or asking them questions or even just screaming in the face. They all got some sort of interaction from me. I also made sure to acknowledge the fact that my performance was being recorded, so whenever the camera was in the room, I particularly went over to the camera. An example of me breaking the fourth wall would be giving each person a sweet at the beginning, because I was interacting with them and making contact with them by making them take a sweet. My goal was to create an audience with, a relationship with the audience, and I feel like I did that all the way through. Like, there was never a moment where I wasn't talking to the audience or talking about the audience. Like, I was always present within them. So now I'm going to be talking about the rehearsal process. So regarding the rehearsal process, I was quite unsure what I was going to do. So I weren't like sure on how I wanted my performance to go. So I constantly kept changing my mind. I developed a storyline for my character, and I feel like it completely changed within the end result. We were able to go to the castle and evaluate our spaces and work out how we could dress them, etc. But we didn't really get that long in the castle to be able to rehearse in our space due to it being open to the public. So I had improvised by rehearsing my script in uni until I was able to go and rehearse properly in my space. During this time period, I had a solid idea on how I wanted my set to look, but not for anything else. Regarding my sound, I was extremely indecisive and tried many different strategies to try and get it right, but I struggled with this. I ended up changing my sound completely on the day of the performance, and it sounded exactly how I wanted it to sound. I wanted to present my character in almost a zombie-like way, and we had like a dress rehearsal to make sure our costumes were on point. I just bought a fortune teller costume and ripped it up to make it look scary, and it worked really well. The day before the performance, I got my classmates to come in and watch my performance to give me feedback. We did this quite a lot through the rehearsal process, and I used them and my lecturers' ideas to make my performance a little bit better than it already was. The only problem was I missed a few of the workshops within university, so I had to improvise with my smell and taste ideas, which did end up working really well. They were both a hit. One problem I had was I ended up changing my whole set last minute, as the space just didn't work and it was quite small, and I weren't able to fit all of my my props and stuff in it. So we ended up changing that on the day, but other than that, I feel like the rehearsal process ran quite smoothly, and I felt confident enough to perform from it. So finally, I'm going to be talking about my final performance. So overall, I feel like my performance went very, very well, and I got some amazing feedback from it, from people who came to see it. I only think this because I had a good reaction with the audience, and they seemed genuinely scared, which was the main goal. So yes, I do feel like it ran quite smoothly. However, I do feel like there is things that I could change, such as rehearsing more in the space. I feel like I could have done with a lot more rehearsal time. Looking more into my senses. So I feel like I could have used something a bit more expected than incense, because I feel like incense is something that you'd associate with a fortune teller anyway. Another thing I could probably change is dressing my space a little bit more, because it was quite bland, and I ended up making a sign last minute, and I feel like if I didn't have the sign, no one would quite know I was like a fortune teller. So I would have put a bit more detail into my set. Sound, definitely be a bit more organised with the speakers, and make sure I have two different sets of audio. But other than that, I feel like my performance went very, very well, and I'm very proud of the outcome.